Is Arsenal's attack worse than last season? I mean, if you look at the stats, yes, but there is a lot more to it. Arsenal have been steadily progressing this season. They've had some good results and some bad results, you could say. Their performances haven't really been amazing, but they are still 1 point off of top of the league, Manchester City. And they beat Manchester City as well, so it's still been a decent start to the season for Arsenal overall. But with the lack of chances created against some of the smaller sides and a lot of their frontline players not really working, what is going wrong at Arsenal? Well, let's find out. It's a good thing to say that despite Arsenal's attacking quality, they did not create the most XG last season. They actually sat at 5th in the Premier League despite coming 2nd in the end. They were behind Liverpool, Brighton and Newcastle and only created around 76.51 XG. However, that accomplished by their XG against, which was actually the 3rd best in the league. Their expected points was around 2nd in the league, just ahead of other teams, so they deservedly came where they came. And their attack had a brilliant season. Martinelli and Odegaard both scored 15 league goals and Bukayo Saka scored 14 league goals as well. However, this season, just on the raw stats alone, it's not really been the same. Saka has still managed to get 4 goals and 4 assists in the Premier League in 11 appearances, but Martinelli's down with 1 goal and 2 assists, and Jesus has only scored 1 goal in 7 games. But the actual raw stats aren't really the concerning part for Arsenal because they're still getting goal contributions from them. The reason why it's a cause for concern is Arsenal are as low as 7th in the league for expected goals. They are not creating enough chances per game, and this was off the back of the season where Arsenal are supposed to take the next step. There is no denying that these numbers on the face of it are concerning. However, there are reasons definitely to be okay if you're an Arsenal fan, because Arsenal are controlling games with superior standard than they did last season. Although their goal scoring has suffered, they've conceded the least amount of goals in the Premier League this season alongside Liverpool. And this is no fluke because the underlying data actually backs this up for Arsenal. As you see in this table here, how much XG has been created in games involving Premier League teams, Arsenal are actually bottom of it. Now, there's been a lot of fans piping up about this graph thinking that it's a bad thing for Arsenal to be bottom, which is definitely not, because Man City, look, are the 4th from bottom. All it means is in games that they are playing, the XG that they're creating and against them is combined is the lowest out of everyone in the league. And although this will come as a concern for the attacking phases because they are not creating enough, they are also not conceding a lot either, conceding the least amount in the league XG per game. So basically their games are boring as hell basically. And this is still good for Arsenal. It's not the best to be bottom maybe because they're not creating enough. Manchester City also have a brilliant defence, that's why they're probably near the bottom, but they probably create and score more chances themselves, why I'm putting them a bit above a few teams. However, you've also got to look away from the data, and Arsenal simply aren't really creating enough to be Premier League champions or Champions League champions at this point. Manchester City are so good at creating chances and still defending well, but Arsenal can only seem to do one at a time, so it's going to take time to get their whole team to adapt and be able to keep the final third as good as the defence. And despite overall it looking like Man City have a more likely chance to win most games that they play over Arsenal, even though some games obviously you're not going to get luck and you're not going to get your right away, it is factual that Arsenal have not been playing up to their potential this season and they have really been struggling going forward, but I don't expect that to last, and I think because their defence is better that their team will end up having a higher ceiling than they did last season. And depending on how many points they are adrift, they could really fight for this title and could fight for different championships this season if they can get it right, and being 1 point away from it right now is very good, but they need to keep there and probably stay afloat with Manchester City and Liverpool. And the reason why Arsenal have changed overall could be down to the players that have brought in. They brought in Havertz in midfield, they brought in Rice in midfield, obviously making their team probably better overall, but not better right now as the team is struggling to create chances. And Arsenal have had 1 or 2 key players injured or suspended for quite a few games. I mean, Odegaard hasn't played that much, Saka was out for a few games, Martinelli didn't play games, Jesus has been injured, they've had problems in defence with injuries, Ben White is now out for a bit, so it's going to be a bit of tops and turns, but Arsenal have still put up a good performance in each game. And when they haven't put up a good performance, they have managed to get results in most of their games. Against Newcastle, they simply weren't good enough and didn't really deserve anything, but got a bit unlucky with the goal. Against Chelsea, they obviously got a draw where they didn't deserve it and did really good resilience to come back. And it is hard for Arsenal fans and people to see Arsenal because it probably looks like they are worse than last season, but the reason why Arteta has done this is because Arsenal were a very predictable team last season. Their XI was set in stone nearly every single game. As soon as they got a few injuries, the whole system was basically ruined, and they just had the same attacking flows they had all season where teams basically couldn't get them because they were so good. But when them players are out of form, it's easier to defend what they're trying to do. And it's no doubt that the Premier League have the best managers in the world, so all over the league people are going to adapt to what you're doing if you continue to do the same thing. We did the same thing with different managers like Nuno at Wolves, where he just did the same thing every year. It worked at the start and then eventually he got found out. This is one of the big reasons why people like Manchester City and Pep Guardiola like changing their system all the time. Arsenal were also able to play the same XI last year nearly every game because the fact they had no European football after very much time. They went out to Sporting in the Europa League and had a long time without any European football. Obviously this year they're back in the Champions League and they want to do well in that competition. You can't be resting your best players in the Champions League, as we have seen, as they lost to on, and it wasn't a very good performance. And last season was all about that one system and getting everyone to understand that one system and play together as a team in that with just them players. Even people like Vieira, who were on the bench, barely even got a look in for most of the season, and people like Smith Rowe couldn't get anywhere near the team even when he was fit. And this year, because of injuries or what has ever happened, that he's obviously had to use different players. Vieira started, Smith Rowe started, Havertz has started, Trossard started. There's been a lot of different switches and teams, and some of the players that they wanted to play like Timber obviously haven't worked out because he's been injured for so long straight away on his debut. But Arteta knew this season they had to rely on the squad, and we have seen Arsenal's squad size grow and be a lot more physical and have a lot more different aspects in the game. And even someone that expects every single setback in their life would not expect this many injuries for Arsenal. It's not just Arsenal, there's been a lot of teams in the Premier League struggling with a lot of injuries, probably because of the amount they are playing, but it really has impacted a lot of the flow and the squad play of a lot of teams in the league, and especially Arsenal one of them. But tactically, the reason why their attack has been struggling is mostly because of that left centre mid role. It has been a combination of a lot of injuries and a lot of the team not playing very well together, but that left centre mid role is becoming a real issue. And I've defended Havertz very many times, so I don't necessarily think it's all down to him, but every single player that's played in that left centre mid role this season has seen the same problems really happen. Last year, Xhaka basically did everything in that role. He's box to box, he defended very physical, and he was very good at tackling and interceptions. He also is very good passer, so he likes passing the ball and creating pressure up the field. I don't have any regrets of Arsenal getting rid of him, because at the end of the day, 21 mil for a 31-year-old you've got to take. But I do think that obviously Arsenal are missing him a lot, and they haven't really found anyone to fit that role because they need that progression to Martinelli specifically. This has been evident by some of the attacking patterns that Arsenal have done this season in the final third. No other team in the league has used the right-hand side of the attack more than Arsenal. That means they're basically giving the ball to Bukayo Saka to basically do everything a lot of the time. And this graph also shows that Arsenal create the least amount of chances from the middle of the pitch this season, with obviously Man City creating the most. And unfortunately, this comes down to Martin Odegaard really struggling this season. I mean, he's still got 5 goals and 1 assist, has been given us some penalties and has done well with the goal scoring part. But in comparison to last season, you can see that he's really struggling on all his creative numbers. His expected assists are down nearly half of what they were last year, which is just not great. However, he is actually having to do a lot of the creative numbers as Arsenal have lost that presence in the left centre mid. They've also had issues with Gabriel Jesus not being reliable up front. He has the creative numbers that Nketiah doesn't, and Nketiah is not as creative as him, so it's not very helpful. Martinelli's obviously been absent as well, and they need his presence and his drive ability to go up the pitch. And it also means that Arsenal have lacked a 1v1 threat. But the real issue has been honestly the attacking plays. Last season, Granit Xhaka contributed 16 goals and assists from the left centre mid role. This season, both Havertz and Rice have failed to manage the level of output, but the blame should not lie on them. If Martin Odegaard cannot produce reliable output within this Arsenal's current attacking dynamics, then we can't expect supplements to attack to carry the burden. They are supposed to basically set up Odegaard anyway, and Odegaard's supposed to do most of it, but he is just not. Xhaka was a runner from deep in the midst of a creativity of Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard and Jesus last season. Once you take away Jesus and one of the wide players away from a guy like Trossard, who is a brilliant player but physically is not very good, then it becomes clearer why the output has suffered. Arsenal are forced to attack more slowly with Trossard on the left over Martinelli. This data also backs this up, as Arsenal averaged 2 direct attacks last season and only averaged 1 this season so far. Overall, the attack is definitely struggling, but considering the circumstances they have in, they've actually done very well this season. And when players like Timber, who is vital for the defence and vital for the attack and flow of this team, they will be so much better because he can defend and do the Zinchenko ball play. And despite the attacking players not necessarily having the best start to the season, Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, these players are literally world class for the potential to be, so they will definitely create enough chances for Arsenal to be great this season. And although it is a concern, control wins titles, and Arsenal have been so much more controlled this season that actually they have probably got a better chance of winning the league this year than they did last year with that control in games. And with the psychological factor that Arsenal have been brilliant this season when they've been crap basically, and they still managed to get results, will be a big part in this league title and this big part in this season. Thank you guys for watching, and please watch my other videos.